My name is Jack Racou. I am a member of Sauvetage Bénévole Outaouais, Ottawa Volunteer Search and Rescue. I have been for about a dozen years now. I think I've played many roles in the organization through that time. Right now, I'm kind of just an active searcher, and I'm also an active search manager on the team. So. And we've been through lots of incidents, so we've got some experience to convey to you tonight.
Hi, so I'm Catherine Dumouchel. Same thing, I've been with the team for 12 years, and just like Jack, have played different roles through the years, which is a great part about being on this team. There's many opportunities. Currently, I'm one of the trainers, and I'm also the director for our incident management team, so sort of coordinate all the various search managers on the team. If you're worried about social distancing, Jack and I are in a family bubble, so we're safe from now. Quentin, I just want to confirm that the screen is good, that you can see the full screen.
Yes, we can see the full screen, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we'll get started, and we're going to kind of take turns at presenting. So.
And I get to go first. So we just thought we'd do a little bit on who we are, because not everybody's heard of this group. So Sauvetage Bénévole Outaouais, Ottawa Volunteer Search and Rescue, is a locally based volunteer search and rescue team. We operate from the Outaouais, but in Western Quebec and Eastern Ontario. We train hard, and we think of ourselves as volunteer professionals. We are available to serve anybody who needs us, that is police and municipalities, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our mandate is kind of threefold. I think our principal thing is that we do ground search and rescue. As opposed to marine rescue or aircraft. We focus on ground search and rescue, but we also do emergency measures, or we help communities when they have issues. So floods and tornadoes are the best examples, and our group has put in thousands of hours in the floods in 2017 and 2019 and on the tornado. And the third leg of our mandate is prevention and preparedness, kind of educational programming. So we try to help people understand how to enjoy the outdoors without having problems, and we help them understand what to do if they should ever get lost. And we do that for children and for adults, and we do some training around the emergency measures things as well. So that's kind of what we do. We have about 200 members, so we're a large group. Volunteers, we're always very poor. The outline for tonight's presentation, it's kind of a two-part thing. The first part is really about being ready. And so we're going to talk about the 3 T's of being prepared. We're going to talk a little bit about some navigational tools that you might use. And after we've done that kind of thing, we'll have the first question period. And then the second part is more about what happens if something goes wrong when you're out there. So there we'll talk about hypothermia. We'll talk about survival priorities. We'll introduce you to STOP. A little acronym that is kind of handy to keep in the back of your head. And we'll talk a little bit about ground search and rescue and how we actually go about conducting a search. And then once we've done that, we'll have another question and answer period. We don't profess to be hardcore survival experts, you know. That's not what this evening is all about. It's more soft stuff. It's focused on day outings, and it's not meant to scare you. Just the opposite. It's meant to help you better enjoy the outdoors safely and responsibly.
Okay, So we're going to start with these 3 T's of being prepared. This concept of the 3 T's actually was developed as part of a national program called Adventure Smart. So you have the link there below if you're interested in Googling that and looking for it. And they've been doing this kind of prevention programs for a number of years, and it's really a great source of information. And right now, in the recent year, they had received funding to make it available as an application, so as an app. So if you go on the App Store, this is available for free, so like a ton of information there. So it's always good to have things in 3s. It kind of helps you remember things. So this one is, the 3 T's are about trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. And we're going to walk you through all those various activities. So trip planning, the idea is that before you go out on an outing, it's always good to sort of plan ahead and do a bit of homework before you go. And some of the elements of trip planning is kind of, one of it is kind of plan your travel route, or, you know, where are you going to go? So basically, you know, it's looking at map or trail maps ahead of time. It's kind of figuring out, you know, what trail you want to do or what route you want to plan, how long it's likely to take, where are you going to start? Is this a loop? Is this an in and out? So all those kinds of various questions that you ask. How long is very kind of important one, because particularly right now, you know, 4 o'clock, you know, darkness falls. So you need to be ready for that. You know, you need to sort of have that plan ahead so that you don't get caught in sort of more difficult situation. So planning your route is a key aspect of trip planning that you need to go ahead. You just don't arrive at a trailhead, look it up and say, oh, I'm going to go and do that without having given some thought before that. We're going to talk a bit about navigation tools. There's a lot of new things now available for you to do that. So we'll have a little section on that, and Jack's going to cover that in a little while. The other aspect of trip planning is kind of get a sense of the terrain and the conditions. So for example, like we know in Gatineau Park, you know, a trail can be like a, you know, a steep trail, or, you know, it might end up, you know, being marshy area, or you'd have to go around ponds. So it's kind of like understanding that, so you're prepared to address those kinds of various situations. It's always good if you have it to go and check trail conditions. So for example, skiing in Gatineau Park is great. You can check the trail conditions ahead of time and be prepared for that. If you're going outside of, like, in other areas, I mean, there's a great website that gives you sort of like information about trails, and they'll give you, you know, a very detailed sort of like, you know, description of, you know, from kilometer to kilometer, what you can expect. So those are great to look at, because it really helps you sort of be prepared and helps you plan ahead of time. It's always good in terms of conditions also, like what would affect the condition of the trail or the condition of the terrain. So, you know, like if it's been rainy for the last week, you know, how does that affect, you know, is it going to be muddy? Is it going to be slippery? And you need to be ready for that. And also, for example, you know, we just had a recent really heavy snow. So if you're going snowshoeing, that's going to be a very different kind of experience, you know, whether you have a hard surface, easy to walk on, or really, really deep snow, that's going to make it a lot harder. So all of these things will affect, you know, how that experience is. So those things are important to take into consideration before you go ahead. Other aspects of trip planning is checking the weather, and we'll talk a bit about that also with some tools that are available out there that can kind of provide you some heads up as to what you can expect. And then the final one about trip planning is this idea of a trip plan. And then we'll also talk a bit about that in more details.
So Catherine just mentioned checking the weather. And I think we probably all have our favorite places to get our weather information, but we thought we'd mention 3 that we use quite extensively here. So the first one there on the screen is storm radar. And the reason I like storm radar is because of the radar on it. Sounds like an obvious thing, but anyway, but it has predictive radar. So it not only shows you the radar of what's happening right now, but if you see that little bar at the bottom there, you can go through that, and it will give you about the next 6 or 7 hours of predicting what's going to happen. So it shows you on a predictive radar where the storm is expected to go. And I find that really handy to know when is the rain going to hit me, or when is the snow going to hit me. The second one on that screen is the Environment Canada WeatherCan app that I have on my phone. I like it because it does give me some warnings, as does Storm Radar. So things pop up on my screen with respect to weather advisories, that sort of thing. So it's always nice to, you get a little buzz on your phone and you understand that there's something going on. The next one there is one called storm weather, or spot weather, or we often call it SpotWex because of the way it's spelled there, SPOTWX. And you're seeing one of the screens when you get into it, but where it starts, you start with a map, and you move your location around on the map. So you move to wherever you want to be, wherever you want the weather, and then you click the button and it gives you the weather for that exact spot. And it's quite detailed. So you get a number of these graphs. First of all, you can choose from almost a dozen weather providers, and they'll give you these graphs for 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or 16 days. So you can get as long or as short a period as you want. I find that most of the times I'm looking at 2 days, I'm looking at something in the near future, and that's what you're seeing on the screen there. It's got Wednesday and Thursday here. So on that top graph, you're just seeing a graph of what the temperature is predicted to be, along with the relative humidity. And so, I mean, it's fairly obvious, in the beginning of the graph, it's daytime, so the temperature is a little higher, and then you can see it's going down and down and down into Wednesday and Thursday through the night, and then obviously Thursday was a cooler day. The next graph down is one of the ones I use the most. It has precipitation, so you get these little blue boxes. So that's that's rain, and it shows you how much rain you're going to get and exactly when you're going to get it in that location. So you can figure out the hours. And then over further into the Wednesday part of that graph, you're seeing snow, just a different color. And so there was a little bit of snow that day as well. And along the bottom is cloud cover. So, and what that's showing us is there was 100% cloud cover for most of the day, except for Wednesday at midnight. There was a clearing, and then it went, and then it got socked in again, and then until Thursday opened up and it was clear again. So those are two of the graphs. There's other ones below that, but it's a very handy app when you want to get weather for a very specific location.
So you can really use this to plan your outing. You can really tell exactly what's going to happen at any given time during your outing. So it's kind of a useful tool to have. Okay. So we mentioned earlier also this concept of a trip plan. And the trip plan, the idea is that this is information about your outing, and it could be like for a short outing if you're going out for a hike for the day, or it could be for a longer outing if you're going on a 5-day camping trip or something like that. And basically it's information that you leave with someone, and then if ever something happens to you and you don't come back when you said you were going to come back, this person can then take that information and then provide that, let's say, to a police service, or anybody, any kind of authority, people who have authority on sort of lost person sort of incidents. So sometimes people feel, oh, maybe that's a bit exaggerated. I'm just going for 2 hours in Gatineau Park. But especially if you're like, some people like to go alone. We don't really recommend sort of a lone outing, but some people do. So it's really good to let people, particularly if you're going alone, let people know. but you never know what's going to happen. So I think leaving that kind of information is always useful. So it can take many forms. So on this Adventure Smart app, for example, there is an online process where you can kind of enter this information and then send it to somebody. But it can also be a note that you leave, hi Jack, I'm off to walk, the trail 50, I'm going to leave from P16. I'm going with my friend Isla. We're leaving at such a time. We'll be back. So it could be sort of a little note I leave. Or sometimes you think about it like, well, I'm alone, or I don't know a lot of people. So who should I leave this? You can leave it to people even if they're far away by email or text. You can text people that are far away and let them know what you're doing. As long as you text them back that you're back, then that can also be used as a trip plan. We have an example when our son was traveling in Patagonia and he was doing some long hikes. So he would send us a text with a picture of the map of the trail he was going on, when he was going to start, when he was going to end. So if something had, what are going to be the step he was in. So if something had happened to him along the way, at least we would have had some information to be able to contact the authority with. So that's the concept of that trip plan. So what's on a trip plan? So basically you answer all those obvious questions. So who's going? So, and you would say who is it? Who are you going with? Is it one person, two people, three people, their name, their gender, their age, and maybe something about their medical condition, if there are any that you would be concerned about. You would also say when. So when do you plan to go? So when are you going out? And most importantly, when do you plan to come back? So people can start sort of looking for a message from you that you're back. You can give yourself a little buffer so that people don't worry if you're an extra hour or something like that. So but you can kind of sort of mention when you plan to come back. The why you're going, so what kind of what's the purpose of your outing? I'm going out for a hike, but it could be, so I'm going out for a hike, but at the same time I'm going to be looking for to see if I can find this famous bluebird that's hanging out in the Meech Valley or something like that. So both, the purpose of your outing and then the kind of activity that you're going to undertake while you're going out. And then you can say then obviously the where, so kind of the general area that you're going to be going in, what kind of route or trail you're going to be taking, what's your start point. And we'll talk a bit about that, how important that is when we're talking about if something does go wrong, all this information is going to be super important. The what is kind of, usually it's about what are you bringing with you? What kind of equipment do you have with you? So for obviously your day outing, it's more like, that's just a little day pack. But if you're going on a longer outing, describing your equipment and supplies gives a good sense of how ready you are for that particular outing. And then the how is about how you get there. Are you getting there by car, by bus, by bicycle, on foot? So often a vehicle is where we would start, often is where we might start a search. And also if you're going by vehicle, that is something that, if you are not where you said you were, we can look for that vehicle, let's say in Gatineau Park, in other parking lots or something like that. So this is the content of that trip plan: the who, the when, the why, the where, the what, the how. And again, it could be a kind of a full document, or it could be a text that kind of to your best friend that kind of describes those kinds of things. So that's a key sort of part of being prepared. So that sort of one of those the T's is the trip plan is a key one. The next one that we were talking about in terms of being another important T in the 3 T's of being prepared is kind of the idea of training. And basically, it's kind of like before you go out on an outing, you should have the knowledge and the skills that you need before you head out. So we're going to be telling you, what to bring with you when you go on an outing. So let's say, you just bought a new compass because somebody told you you should bring a compass with you. Well, it's not when you lost and all of a sudden you get the compass out of the package and you start reading the instructions. You need to practice with your tools before you go out. So you need to kind of work at those knowledge and skills before you go out. And it's often a good idea to practice when the conditions are favorable, as opposed to practice when you're in a stressful situation. So if you've got a new compass or a new GPS or other tools that we'll be talking about, then you could use it maybe in a city part before you head out in the wilderness with them. So kind of use it in a safe environment. Same thing with you got all your fire starting equipment, but so have you ever started a fire? And maybe it's a good idea to start one, in a sort of a easier environment to start with, and do that, in the middle of a pouring rain. And also training heads in search and rescue, we often talk about building muscle memory. It's kind of like the more you practice, the more these things come naturally to you. And in stressful situation, having muscle memory is very good, because you're sort of not having to think too much. You're kind of like automatically going into that mode. Another thing about having the knowledge and skills is, for example, your first aid kit. You buy a first aid kit, you put it in your pack, and then all of a sudden you got a major bleed, you open your first aid kit and all it has in it is Band-Aids, so it's like open the first aid kit, before you go out. So this is all about sort of that training, having the knowledge and skills of, that are necessary for heading out. Another aspect of it is also knowing and staying within your limits. And I think they're finding this is quite interesting with COVID, and like people are, spending more time closer to home and going in the outdoors, and it's all great, but sometimes people, either they overestimate their skills or they underestimate the time that they're going to be, out there, or the time that it will take to do a hike or something like that. So that's kind of an important aspect, especially when you're kind of new to a particular activity. So questions that you can ask, is this my first time going out? Is this the first time I hike this trail, and things like that. So looking at things like, your fitness level, is there any medical condition? Are you just recovering from a knee injury? What's your experience in being outdoors, and things like that. So these are all things that you should consider before you kind of start choosing a trail or choosing a particular activity to do. And based on that, you can determine what should be the length of the trail I want to go on. What difficulty. So I mean, in Gatineau Park, for example, on the trails, it has a, green, blue, and black sort of, so maybe if you've never done, cross-country skiing, don't head out on the backcountry black trails, that might be a good idea. And also, I think it's going to help you with your understanding your fitness, and all those things will help you kind of figure out when should I start my outing. We often see people, like, we'll be coming back from a hike at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and we see people heading out and they don't have a lot of equipment with them, and darkness is coming, and and we're thinking, oh wow, this is not the greatest kind of situation here. So it's really sort of thinking about knowing your skills and your capacity, and it also influences, maybe you should leave early in the morning, so to give yourself all day if something happens and you're overdue and you don't end up, being out there in the dark. So training is another part of that 3T. Is kind of like, you may have all the greatest equipment in the world, but if you haven't trained for using it, or again, if you may want to climb Everest, but maybe you start, by going to Mount King or something. Part of training, this is just a bit of an aside, is what we found is, when you're going out in the forest, or, in the outdoors like that, and you do end up in a situation where you need first aid, we're really recommending that that you take some first aid training, again, sort of help you sort of figure out what to do with that first aid kit. But we found that the wilderness first aid type courses are really sort of ideal for the kind of activities that you will be getting into. So we would recommend a wilderness first aid course. So there's a 2-day course, which is kind of like a standard first aid. There's a 4-day course that's sort of an advanced first aid. And there's an 8-day course, and that's more like a sort of wilderness first responder. That might be a bit beyond, but if you're going on an expedition or something, or a longer trip, to have somebody that has that level of qualification could be kind of a really good. And why we do recommend that particular course like that is the content of the course, the scenarios, the simulation that are you going to be doing are really outdoor activity based. So they're really relevant to the kinds of things that you're going to be doing. You know, I remember taking standard first aid for, to be in our search and rescue team, and some, it was like, electrical shock or something. And it was like things that were not necessarily so related. But this, in the wilderness first aid course, it's really kind of focused on your outdoor activities. There's a lot of time spent on hypothermia or hyperthermia, and we'll talk about these concepts. And those are real common issues in outdoor situations. So having that focus is really important. So it really gives you some really good idea about what to do in those situations. It's also recognizing that when you're out in, far away in a forested area or in a park or things like that, the paramedics are not going to be there within 5 or 10 minutes. So you're not in an urban environment where, if the person, if you find a person who's hurt themselves, the idea is don't move, and then you're waiting for the paramedics to arrive so that they can take over and do what's necessary. But in most of these cases, in wilderness settings, you're not going to have that. So you need to be able to sort of provide that first aid, and also look at how you, extract yourself from that particular situation. So in wilderness first aid, for example, they show you how to move people in a safe manner and things like that. So that is really kind of quite relevant to what we're talking about. It helps you build that resilience. So it's important to when you're in the field, that you have that sort of extra depth of knowledge that will help you with a difficult situation. And also there's some great suggestions for a first aid kit. So for example, you can buy a first aid kit at the pharmacy, but how to augment that, how to add sort of particular items that are particularly useful for when you're out in the wilderness. It's a great course for that. You will spend time sort of looking at what those items are. So this is just an add-on in terms of when we talk about training as a part of being prepared. This is something that we would kind of highly recommend.
So in the outline, we talked about taking the essentials, or what things should you take with you. And I think the reason we want to talk about that is because in our business, sometimes we see people that go who are totally unprepared for going into a wilderness area. I'm thinking of 4 young people that decided that they should go up to Luskville Falls to watch the sunset. And it was a nice summer day, and so they're in shorts. The girls are in little tank tops and stuff, but and they had nothing with them at all. And they seem to have forgotten that after sunset comes darkness, and so it got dark immediately, and then they're trying to negotiate their way back down, and they got off the trail and then started hitting the cliffs along the edge of the escarpment. But it got cool that night, it rained, and millions of mosquitoes came out. So by the time we found these young people, and it didn't take too long to find them, but by the time we did, they were really totally eaten by mosquitoes. So it was too bad. So what we want you to do now is just as we talk about what you should take with you, why don't you participate in this? You can go onto the chat line. Is that up on the? Oh, they're already doing it. So
yes,
you tell us.
a lot of responses already.
Okay, so you tell us what you think you should take. So. And Quentin's gonna.
I can read if you want. For example, Francisco is taking water, extra gloves, extra t-shirts. Jeremy is bringing Water and snacks. Joanne, water, plastic garbage bag, cell phone, car keys, glasses, wallet. Cam Van Dag is taking her first aid kit. Natalie is taking with her water headlamp. We have John, who is taking with him hand lamp, batteries, a large rash bag to make a poncho, and trash. Jocelyn is taking pocket knife and flashlight. Cathy is taking a poncho. Marion is taking water, extra sweater, snacks, Kleenex. Oh, a lot of people are taking a lot of things. So I'm seeing water, extra sweater, snacks, clean. Oh, I already told that. Bug repellent, map, compass, GPS. For example, Natalie is. I'm lost a little bit. Fire starter, matches. Cathy is bringing dry socks. Amanda, communication device for spot communication device. Alison is taking a flashlight. Nigel, good footwears. Roger is taking rain gears, extra hats, mittens, extra food, headlamp, first aid kit, compass. John, bug repellent. Tanya is taking all above plus emergency blanket, snacks. Elizabeth is taking a space blanket, is good too. Fire starters, water purifiers, band-aids. Joanne is taking a whistle. Guillaume, lights. Fire signal, food and water, extra clothes, map, first aid, tarp, shelter, knife, extra battery. So Cathy is taking a extra battery pack for cell phone. So there is a lot of coming. Maybe I will take more, a few more, and we will stop because we can spend the whole night taking a lot of things. So yes, water, phone, other depends on time of use. So Jay, is taking the 6 Cs. Do you know the 6 Cs? So cut, contact, communicate, collect, cord, calories, cover. Maybe there is more than 6. And Jane is taking a solar charger. So that's a lot of things to bring. What do you think?
I think it's quite amazing. So I think you've probably hit everything. So these are the essentials in the Adventure Smart Essentials. They have, I think there's 10 of them. So I think you got pretty well all of them, the flashlight or a headlamp, the fire making kit, signaling. We have a signaling devices. I think it should be plural because some of you mentioned the whistle, but you can have the mirror on a compass. You can have a bright colored jacket can be used to signal an airplane. So there's all kinds of things that can be used for signaling in different situations. Food and water, many of you mentioned, extra clothing, and navigation and communications items. So people mentioned, their phone, and they also mentioned bringing extra batteries. So that's great. A first aid kit, an emergency shelter. A number of you said space blankets. I must admit, I find them kind of flimsy and not as robust as you might want. So one of the things we recommend is just going one step up and buying yourself a little bivy sack. It's kind of like a garbage bag on steroids. It's a plastic bag. Katrin wants me to show it.
No, we'll stop and then we can show them.
We'll show it to you when? Later?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll show it to you later. But it's just a foil lined garbage bag, so it's quite robust. So I think you guys have done really, really well. All we have to do is remember to take these things. So obviously, the other illustration on the slide there of essentials is that you need a little backpack to go with that. So something around, you know, for a day pack, you know, 15, 20 liters, I think is probably a lot. That varies a little bit with season. So I'll obviously carry a little bit more in the winter because I'll carry extra mitts, extra headgear. And usually what I do in the winter is I also take my oldest down sweater or down puff jacket, whatever you call those things, and I stick that in my pack. They're very light and they stuff really, really well, but it's nice to have that if you do get stopped, you know, you hurt an ankle or hurt a leg or you get immobilized for any reason, you need that extra clothing fairly quickly. But anyway, excellent, excellent work, folks.
So we're gonna just stop sharing for a minute and then we'll show you a couple of things that we have in our backpacks.
This is the little Adventure Smart bivy sack that I was mentioning. If I were to take it out, you would just find it's a plastic bag, which doesn't pop out all that quickly. Yeah, it's a really nice material. I don't think you can see that there. And if you look in the inside, it's actually foil on the inside, so it reflects your heat back into you. And that it's amazing how much one of these little bags will keep you warm in an emergency. So you just find a nice place to curl up. And this is my little fire bag. So it's just a little plastic bag, and I have just a variety of things. I have a plastic container with waterproof maps. I have several different sorts of easy light things like this waxy paper, and then these balls that the light. I have these special matches in there, which has actually got its own, like it's a match that will burn for about 10 or 15 minutes. I do have a lighter, although they say you know, that doesn't work very well in cold weather. So, but I think these matches, my waterproof matches, will. I don't go for you know, sparking things. I don't go for a bow drill or something, because usually if I'm in a situation where I need fire, I feel I need it fairly quickly, and so I take whatever I can to do it, to make a fire as quickly as I can. My little headlamp. This is a nice light little BioLite headlamp. They are excellent. I always have an extra compass in my pack someplace, and it's one with a mirror, so I can signal planes with it. And then some sort of small first aid kit. And then Tren was insistent that I mention this vet. We call it vet wrap. It's like what used to be elastic bandages, but it's dry and it just kind of sticks to itself. So it was called vet wrap because veterinarians used it on animals, but now it's available in any drugstore. And so these little rolls are kind of nice for wrapping a dressing against a wound or something. So, and your water bottle, and our water bottle, you see it has a big wad of tape, of masking, or duct tape wrapped around it. And duct tape can be really, really useful in an outdoor situation, either for, you know, patching your coat or patching a rip in your clothing, or even putting a splint on a leg or a wrist or something. You can do it really quickly with that.
Blisters.
Yeah, blisters. Yeah, it's good for blisters. And then here's a little pad. If you want to keep your bum off the ground and keep yourself warm, it's nice to have just a little piece of Ensolite in the back of your backpack, and it doesn't take up much room, but it can be very useful. That's it, I think, for what we'll show you quickly.
Yeah, so we when we do this in person, normally we would go through the whole sort of bag, and it's just a bit more difficult to do here online, but we just wanted to show you a couple of things in there. So, and if you have questions after, about, other things that we put in and our favorite, the sort of gear, we'll be happy to answer or to
yeah, I was thinking now I just put hand warmers in mine because it's that time of year when you might need them. I've obviously got some snack bars in there too. So.
And sometimes people feel like, oh, wow, 10 essential, that's a lot of things. But, again, you can squeeze that into a very small pack and, use that to hike. We carry ours when we ski. We used to ski with absolutely nothing, we would just go and hope for the best. But now we always take it with us when we ski also. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing the screen so we can continue. Quentin, we're back okay?
Yeah, you are back on the presentation.
Go forward now.
So we're going to move into, like, we talk about navigation tools, and we're going to be sort of talking a bit about that.
All right, so navigation tools, like, it's a very large subject. I should mention one of the things that Katrin and I have always done is we've always used Basecamp on our home computers. And we've invested in maps so that we can always print out a little map of the area we're going to. So an 8.5 by 11 map, and we can even mark waypoints on it and then down or upload those to our GPSs and stuff. So that's one of the ways we've explored the park. We live right on the park. It's across the street from where we are now. And we've always kind of looked for places in the park and said, hey, we've never been there before. And then we take off and go there. But nowadays, there's a lot of other tools. So these are some of the ones that we have on our phone, on my phone, actually, this is. So the first one up in the corner there is the Venza maps. Then we have View Ranger. And then I'll skip over Topo Maps for a second and go to All Trails and Gaia. So those four are all kind of GPS related apps that have maps and trails on them. So they each have their strengths and weaknesses. And I think the key for you is to find one that you like and then get to know it. As Katrin said earlier, if you get out in the forest and you want to use it, but you don't know how because you haven't tried it before, it's not the best time. So try and pick one and then use it so that you get used to it. The other one, the Topo Maps one, I've always had that. I've had that on my phone for years and years. All Topo Maps gives you the ability to upload to your phone the normal NRCan or Natural Resources Canada maps, Topo Maps. And so I have all the Topo Maps for this region in my phone, and I can call them up fairly easily. And it's kind of nice being on, when it's computer based, you can also blend them together so you don't get the divisions between the Topo Maps. And I don't have to carry these huge maps that blow away in the wind and that sort of thing. And when I'm in cell coverage, that particular app actually tells me exactly where I am on the map. These other navigational tools, they utilize the GPS chip in your phone, so they will usually work without cellular coverage. We'll go on to the next slide. So practice using them, download maps of the area you're going to ahead of time if that is needed with your particular app. You can usually use them without cellular coverage. You can also use them in airplane mode because one of the things with these apps, when they're using the GPS chip in your phone, they do require quite a bit of battery power. So you might want to use airplane mode to reduce the drag on your battery, or better still, and advisably, I would say you carry an extra battery to charge up your phone if you need to. So that's a really handy thing to have when you're out in the woods. When you have to phone the police, you don't want to be doing it when you have, just 5% less left on your phone. You want to be able to charge it up again so that you can talk to the people that can rescue you if you have cell coverage. And finally, on that slide, we talk about paper maps, and that was where I started. So paper maps are still very useful. So if you want to go that route, and I really love printing out these little almost like disposable maps that we print out of our own printer, and that's a good way to go. Having a map in hand certainly allows you to get a better idea of the lay of the land, rather than doing it on the 2-inch screen on your iPhone or on any cellular phone. Okay, Trent.
Yeah, so we're talking about, all these apps are now available, and I think we see more and more people using them. And I think, they're great tools, and sometimes they have amazing amount of details on them. But we still think that there is value to sort of some of those bigger maps, like Jack was saying, some of the paper maps. So for example, this is just sort of like sort of screenshots of the Get Park map, but you can get topographic maps, which are really useful tools for any area that you're planning to visit in Canada or in the rest of the world. And those are available, and you can have them printed for the area you're going to be into, sometime at the scale that you want and everything. So that's it's still a very useful tool. Some of the features of a map that's useful is this concept of scale. So like on the Gatineau Park maps, for example, 1 to 50,000. So 1 centimeter on the map is, half a kilometer in the real world. So it gives you a sense of, how long is this trail? What are the distances that I'm likely to be, trying to undertake? So it's kind of that sense of scale is important. So, and on the Gatineau Park map, you want to be careful, because on one side, the scale is 1 to 50,000. On the other side is 1 to 25,000. So, the distances on the map are not this, you have to pay attention to that, because in one case, but the same distance, you're covering twice the area on the ground. So just want to be careful about that. So scale is a key feature of a map. The map also gives you a sense if you want to do, trail 11 or something, and then it gives you a sense of what are the other trails in the area, what junction am I likely to encounter? And sometimes on some of the app, you may not get as strong a sense of that. And we had an interesting encounter this summer with a couple that ended up at the end of Trail 36 towards by Meech Lake there, and they were trying to get around Meech Lake. They figured, from what they could see on their map, they were going to be able to walk around the whole lake. And then, well, that was not going to happen. And then, well, they wanted to get to P16 because they figured, well, there's a parking lot and we'll be close to where they start, but they started at P11, and we were telling them, well, that's a really long way. So, that big picture of the park just wasn't there, and I think that could create real confusion because they were looking just at their screen on their phone. So again, the maps can be very useful. So it shows, like I say, other trails, features. It also shows the contour lines. So it shows these lines. So contour lines are sort of lines of elevation. So if you were to walk on a contour line, you would always stay at the same elevations. Obviously, you can't do that, but it still gives you a sense of the features of the land. So the closer the contour lines are together, the steeper. So on Gatineau Park, on the escarpment, the lines are really tight to one another. The wider apart they are, the flatter the area. So it gives you a sense, is this trail going to be arduous, or is it going to be an easy trail, depending on some of those sort of relief that are going to be found. One of the things that we always mention, though, about the Gatineau Park Trail, just to be careful, is if you look on topo maps, the way topo maps are designed, north is at the top of the map, so it really allows you to sort of figure out, east, west, and south, and bearings in between. But on the Gatineau Park map, the north is slightly to the left there. So you just want to be careful when you're kind of trying to orient yourself and generally about an area. So kind of be careful about that. But otherwise, it's a very detailed map, and it's really useful to give you that big picture that we're talking about. So again, know your tools, understand how they work, understand what they bring you, like what kind of advantages it is to use that tool and what are the disadvantages, and then kind of build your toolkit around everything that you've got available to you.
Section 2 then, we said section 1 was about getting ready. So section 2 is, so what happens if something goes wrong? And none of us expect it to happen, but every once in a while something does go wrong. So you injure yourself, you get misdirected, or you get lost out there. Certainly Katrina and I have done that a few times. We never got lost, so we had to be rescued, but we've got turned around a few times. You might get cold, you know, the weather gets cold or turns cold all of a sudden, or you find you don't have the right clothing for that particular day. Or right now with the short days, it gets dark when you're not expecting it. So you might end up feeling cold. So when we start feeling cold, one of the great things is to understand how we lose heat so that you can take action to stay warm. So there are 5 mechanisms of heat loss, and I'm going to run through them one by one. So the first one is radiation. And you think of that, you know, kind of think of, you know, if I was out on the parkway on a cold winter day skiing and I had a bald head and no hat, and my head is going to be radiating all kinds of heat. My body radiates heat as well, but my clothing captures a lot of that. So it's really that bare skin. So if you want to solve that problem with radiation, usually the thing we say is cover up, or put a toque on is one of the key things, or cover your face if it's really cold. The next item is convection. So really what we're talking about here is wind. So think of me at the same place. I'm on the skiing along the parkway up towards the lookouts, and the wind's sweeping up the escarpment that day, and it's blowing me. So it's blowing into every place where it can get at my clothing, and it's cooling me off. So convection is cools you off by stealing the moisture, by sort of blowing it away. So, and it can be wind, but convection can also be the action of water. So we'll talk about that a little bit later under a different context. But convection, usually with wind, the things we say, there's 2 easy ways, or the 2 best ways to deal with the convection issue is, 1, get out of the wind. So move away from that edge where the wind is sweeping over the escarpment edge and get into some shelter. Or number 2, put on a windproof layer. So if you've got a windproof layer in your bag, that will help you. The next one is conduction, and this is really an important one for any Canadian to know in the winter. So if you sit on anything cold, or you think about grabbing a cold metal pipe in the winter and how cold that would make your hands. Well, the same thing happens to your body when you sit on something cold. So if you sit on a cold rock, or you sit on the cold ground, especially if it's moist, or you sit on a cold bench as you're skiing through the park, these things will suck moisture away from you suck heat away from you very quickly. So this is most important, I think, if you or a companion gets hurt and they're laying down. And one of the first things you would have to do as a first aid measure in the winter is get them off the ground, get some clothing underneath them, or get that foamy you have in your pack underneath them, or even use dry grass or branches, anything to get them off the ground so their body isn't in contact, because they will become hypothermic much more quickly if that conduction allows to steal the heat away from them. Okay, and next one is evaporation. So that's primarily, we're talking about sweating here, but it could also be getting wet in the rain or getting wet from wading across a creek or something. But mostly we're talking about perspiration when you're doing something that's very active, climbing a hill or skiing or any of the really rigorous exercises we do in the outdoor areas. So the way to counteract that evaporation issue is, one, stay dry in the first place. So wear a good wicking layer, you know, so don't wear inappropriate materials next to you. Have a good polypropylene layer, and then you can remove layers to try and keep cool. So just because it's winter doesn't mean you can't take your coat off if you're really generating a lot of heat. So I find it better to take off my coat and then just get to the point where I'm just producing the heat that I need without sweating. And then when I stop, I put my extra layers on really quickly. And the final way, surprisingly, that you lose heat is through respiration, because you're breathing in cold air, your body's heating it up, and then you're breathing it out, and you're losing a lot of heat as you're doing this. So you're going to ask me, well, how do I counteract that? Do I stop breathing? And of course you can't, and we often laugh about that one, but you can reduce the intensity of your exercise so that you're not breathing quite as heavily, and that will help with that, and will also help with the sweating and the perspiration issue. So that's a really quick look at those ways of losing heat.
And understanding, like Jack was saying, those mechanism of heat loss is really sort of a key to try and avoid hypothermia. So basically, we're going to talk a bit about hypothermia. So that's what we're trying to do. And really, hypothermia or exposure is one of the biggest issues in the outdoors. So, sort of one of the key causes of fatalities in the outdoors is actually people who, die from, sort of suffering from hypothermia. And hypothermia basically happens when, your body loses heat faster than it's actually able to produce it. So, and then as that happens, then the body temperature goes down. So usually around, we're about 37 in normal, around 35 is when hypothermia starts to set in. And because your body is kind of picky, it likes to operate at a sort of an ideal temperature. And when it's not there, it's not operating so well. And just want to clarify also, we talk about hypothermia in cold weather, but it's actually hypothermia can happen, actually more often in the spring or in the fall, and so we have to be very careful about that, because often spring and fall, maybe you're not as well dressed for when the weather gets colder, or there's some wet temperature also that affects you and things like that. So this table kind of gives you a bit of a sense of the various levels of hypothermia. So cold stress, you're not really into hypothermia there, but you're starting to feel the cold. And there's mild hypothermia, moderate, and severe. And then it talks a bit about sort of different factors that are visible through this process. So until you get to severe hypothermia, the person will be conscious. So you will be conscious. We'll talk about that level of consciousness. And then into severe, that's when you become unconscious. And then your heart rate goes down tremendously, and it's really a sort of a severe situation. In terms of your movement, so basically in cold stress, you're still moving normally, although it gets a bit less as you get worse. And then when you get into mild and moderate, that's when you're starting to see sort of like your coordination starting to fail. So people, start to stumble, they're kind of clumsy, they're having real problem with fine motor skills, tying their boots back on or opening their backpacks, things like that. It's starting to be impaired. Obviously, once you're unconscious, then there's no movement. In terms of response to hypothermia, so shivering. So shivering is the body's trying to compensate for that heat loss, and it's trying to generate heat. So it's kind of like the muscles your shivering is actually generating heat. So the body's trying to compensate. So in cold stress and mild hypothermia, you're shivering, and moderate, you're shivering also, but at some point the body just can't do it anymore, and you'll stop shivering. So stop shivering is a bad sign in some ways. It's not because the person's actually getting better, is that the body just is no longer able to compensate. So that's something to look for. In terms of your level of, we talk about you're conscious, but are you alert? So in cold stress and mild hypothermia, you're still alert. So you're still able to make some good decisions. But when you get into moderate hypothermia, so you're starting to sort of become a bit confused. Some people can become very quiet, and you're starting to make bad decisions, and your brain is just not operating at full capacity. And there's some very sort of weird behavior that happens also as you get towards there's something in hypothermia called paradoxical stripping, where basically the person actually gets to a point where they're feeling hot, and so they found people that are, shed all their clothing even though they're super cold. So the brain is not sort of being rational about this. It's more of a sort of a automatic reaction. So these are kind of interesting to look at. So basically, if you're with somebody else, being aware of these various sort of signs of what hypothermia can look like, and how it can kind of quickly degenerate from being cold stress to going into that moderate, and often we'll call about the stumble, mumble, fumble as being sort of an example of things that happen. So basically, we're saying an ounce of prevention is really key. So deal with it right away before it, sometimes, I'll say, somebody looks at, you look cold. Oh, it's okay, I'm fine. It's okay, I'm fine. No. If you're feeling cold and you start to shiver, do something about it now. Don't wait till you're fumbling, tumbling. Jack talked about the layered clothing. So this is something that's important in the outdoors, sort of having that inside sort of wicking layer. So like either wool or silk or polypropylene. So a layer that actually takes the moisture away from you, so you're not going to lose heat through evaporation. Jack talked about a particular fabric that you don't want to use, and that's cotton. Cotton is called killer cotton. When cotton gets wet, it just doesn't take away, that moisture stays against your skin, and it's really, really terrible sort of fabric to have. And then there's an insulating layer. So on top of that, you can wear wool or fleece, a layer that traps air, and that's the air that's actually that you're warming up, that's providing insulation. And then that final layer is that protecting layer, sort of that windproof or water repellent layer. So you want to have that, like Jack was saying, you adapt that to the level of activity, and you do it before, not after. Oh, I should take this off now that I'm all wet. You do it before you get all wet. Bringing extra clothing with you so that you can actually then take time to change. If you're like, I know I get really cold feet, and often it's because my socks are actually moist. So having another dry pair of socks or something is really, can really make a difference. Also take time to eat and to drink. So food will provide energy. So you're saying, it's that balance between losing heat, producing heat. You can't produce heat if you don't have energy. So food, but also drinking. Dehydration is also a cause of loss of energy. And in the winter, we don't think about drinking as much, because it's not the same kind of, it's not like in the summer when we're hot and we're drinking a lot. So it's important to also drink in the winter time. And then again, think about these heat loss mechanisms so that you're actually sort of being preventive about them. We're going to talk about another cold situation, and it's a bit of a specialized, shoot.
Our phone is there. That's my slide.
Oh, okay.
You take that. Okay. This is something that every Canadian should know about cold water immersion. It's something that I learned a number of years ago in talking with Dr. Gordon Giesbrecht. He's the they often call him Dr. Popsicle. He's from the University of Manitoba, and he's done groundbreaking research on hypothermia. And so this kind of thing is based on his research. And they've come down to this, this kind of little 1-10-1 rule. It makes it easy for us to remember what getting into cold water in the winter is all about, and how you can deal with that. So the 1 is the 1 minute, and the 1 minute, the first minute is cold shock. So imagine, you know, hitting cold water, and the first thing you're going to do is gasp. You know, and it's really cold. So in that first minute, you have to do only one thing, and that's avoid panic and get your breathing under control. So I'm going to talk to you real slow so you can avoid panic and get your breathing under control. Because if your head goes under the water and you're gasping for air, then you can suck in water, and then you're in real trouble. So just try and be calm. Try and get that. Don't try and get out right away. Just get yourself under control in that first minute. Then the 10 comes along. So that's the 1. Now the 10. You have 10 minutes of before cold incapacitation starts to affect you. So you're going to be able to make meaningful movement during that 10 minutes to self-rescue yourself, to be able to maybe haul yourself out of this water, depending on what the conditions are. But you have lots of time there, so you don't need to panic. You just need to deal with it. And then the other 1 is 1 hour. So surprisingly, like often when we hear about going into cold water, it's made to sound like you're gonna die in like 2 minutes, you know, you're going to be incapacitated in a couple of minutes, in a very, very short time. But actually, you're going to be deadly cold for sure, but you actually have about 1 hour before that cold starts to reach the core of your body and really cause hypothermia. So you have quite a bit of time. So let's go to the next page and just see about how you get yourself out of the water. So this is one of the things that I liked the fact that if I fall into water, which I have done, that I have some time, and then he gives hints about how to get out of the water. So he says, find the strongest part of the ice, and that usually is where you fell in. So you were walking across the ice, it was strong, it was strong, it was strong, then boop, there you go, then it broke. So close to where you fell in, there's ice that supported you before. So that might be a good place to go out. Now, use your arms, get them up on the ice and try and push your body up. But at the same time, you start kicking your legs like you're trying to swim. So, and what you're trying to do is get your legs up on top of the water, or closer to the top of the water, so your body is more horizontal and floating on top of the water. And then you can haul yourself out on the ice, kind of like a seal pulling itself out onto the ice. So you get your body onto the ice, and then rather than standing up right away, you roll or you crawl back to stronger ice. Because if you stand up right away, you might break through the ice again, and then you have to start all over again. So once you've gotten out of the water, you slide away, and you don't stand up immediately. And then, of course, you have to get to shore and get first aid right away, get somebody to help you. At the bottom of that slide, there's a link to BICO Rescue. BICO stands for Baby, It's Cold Outside. That was some of the films that Dr. Giesbrick did. In fact, our group was involved in helping him do one of those films. So if you Google BICO Rescue, you'll find a lot of resources. You'll find some great videos of people falling into the water and exactly how they get out. And I think they're really good to watch because they really kind of calm you and give you the confidence that it can be done, that it's not a death sentence just because you fell into a beaver pond or something. Okay?
Okay, so again, so we talked about the cold and that being sort of a key issue in terms of sort of that could go wrong and how we deal with that. But we're going to talk about when other things also go wrong, or you know, when you're getting into that kind of situation of an emergency of some kind. So we're going to go a bit about survival priority. So there is something that there's this kind of rule of 3. So the idea is I'll be in trouble if I am 3 minutes without something, 3 hours without something else, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. We were going to do a little activity on that, but we're running tight on time. So I think what we'll do is we'll kind of run you through it, but and it might be some surprise. So 3 minutes, I'm in trouble if I'm 3 minutes without air. So basically, if I can't breathe for 3 minutes, I'm going to start to get in trouble. So this kind of indicates that your survival priority is to deal with kind of major sort of first aid situation. What can you be like? You'll be in trouble if you're 3 hours without something else. And that something else is actually that key piece of shelter. So, and shelter can be clothing, it could be, you know, having that sort of little pad underneath you on the ground. It could be, you know, that sort of bivy bag that Jack was talking about. So you don't have to build a huge, you know, sort of wooden structure in the woods, but it's kind of like making sure that you are sheltered from rain, from wind, you know, from the cold of the ground. So that's the 3 hours without shelter. 3 days and 3 weeks is interesting. Often when we do this, people would go 3 days without food, but it's actually 3 days without water. So water is even a more of a survival priority than food. So water is pretty key to all our metabolic processes. So you really need water to survive. So water will be a key aspect of survival. And then 3 weeks without food is the next one. So often people in survival will ask us, well, what kind of plant can I eat and stuff like that? Well, there's more danger, you know, eating the wrong plant and being sick than there is, you know, surviving 3 weeks with, you know, being a little hungry, well, not a little hungry, but being hungry for, you know, 3 weeks. So, you know, 3 weeks without food is kind of that 4th level of priority. And then often they talk about longer survival situation. Hopefully you won't be in that situation, but the final one is after 3 months without human contact, you know, it really starts to affect our ability to survive. And that's been found by people who have had these kind of long-term survival. So again, you know, that 3 hours without shelter, that kind of reemphasizes, you know, the importance of all the things we've been talking about keeping warm and avoiding hypothermia. We also talk about sort of enemies of survival. And often when we say to people, what scares you most about being in the forest? And often they'll talk about wild animals. So, you know, they feel like wild animals is the worst enemy of survival. Well, it's very rare that people in kind of these kinds of situations have been, you know, where wild animals have been a critical aspect. But one thing that is an enemy of survival is fear. And it's kind of like fear, or that sort of reaction to a stressful situation, which is a natural thing. Like fear is not a bad thing, but it can really affect your ability to survive. So fear will inhibit your metabolic process. It will affect, for example, your digestion. So it affects your ability to make food, energy available, calories available. It will impair your circulation. So the blood will flow back to the core. So you'll get cold. It will impact your good judgment. So that kind of like, you know, reflex of, you know, freeze or flight or fight, you know, so you're not really making sort of rational necessary decisions. You're kind of more just reacting to the situation. It also will affect your fine and complex motor skills. So you'll be able to do the big things, but you won't be able to handle like maybe striking a match or building a fire. So fear has an impact on many of the things that you would want to be able to do if you're actually in a sort of a difficult situation in the woods. So the importance of then kind of controlling that fear. And that's where that little acronym comes in that Jack mentioned at the beginning, and he'll talk about it.
So Yeah, the acronym is STOP, and all it stands for is the S is actually stands for stop, and the T stop stands for think, and the O for observe, and the P for plan. So it's just a little acronym that kind of reminds us in a stressful situation where suddenly you decide there's a problem, that you need to just take a moment to gather yourself. So stop, think about your situation, observe. So observe, what are the things that could go wrong? What are the things you need to do? What are the resources that you have, either yourself or your party? Because between a bunch of you, you might have some food, you might have some clothing, you might have some communications tools, you might have all sorts of things when you start looking in your pack that you can use. And then you start developing a plan in how you're going to take action. There's 3 basic actions that we talk about, and we do it the same with you. Or at the bottom, you'll see that we do a program called Hug a Tree for kids, and it's exactly the same 3 actions. So one of the actions is, if you don't know where you're going to go, if you're lost and you don't know how to get out, then stay put. It makes it much easier for us, because if you keep moving, then the circle, then it usually, like for searchers, if you're moving away, it's a radius, and so we have to search this whole area unless we know the direction you travel, and it can make huge area for us to search, and that can slow us down. So if you stay put, that really helps people find you. Signal. So you've got whistles, you've got lights, you've got mirrors, you've got colorful clothing, you've got 3 of anything. You make 3 piles of brush, or 3 piles of rocks, or 3 bursts of light. You know, you can, that's always a sign of an emergency. So you can do that. Shelter. So shelter includes your clothing, by the way. So try and get dressed, stay warm, stay insulated, find a dry place. With the kids, we call it Hug a Tree, because we tell them, get yourself under a big spruce tree or something, and you find kind of a dry spot under there, and hide in there, you know, and you can do the same. You know, you can find a place in the woods that's much more sheltered than a place 10 feet away. So think about what's around you and what you can use to make yourself more comfortable, so that you can survive a longer period of time while you're waiting to be rescued.
Yeah, so with the kids, we talk about make a nest. So, you know, if you don't have anything to insulate yourself, you can just pile up branches and things like that, and then sit on that. So that will provide you with that insulation.
Several times we've mentioned that, you know, virtually all of us have phones now, and we carry them with us everywhere. So one of the easy things you can do is, most of our phones can give you the location of where you are. So this is the screen of an iPhone. I'm not sure what other phones have, but I'm pretty sure they have it too. So this is under the utilities section on your phone, and it's just the compass. But you'll see at the bottom of that screen, there's a latitude and longitude. So that's one way. If you can get through to 911 services, or you can text a friend or something, you can actually text them your exact location. And we've located a number of groups in that way. They're not always able to find their way out, but they do know where they are. And then we just thought we'd mention on that slide that latitude and longitude can be expressed in a number of ways. So it's very important when you convey that to the emergency authorities that you do it very carefully. So it can be read in a number of ways. So the top one is called degrees, minutes, and seconds. So you would read that as, I'm at 45 degrees, 25 minutes, and 27 seconds north, 75 degrees, 44 minutes, and 39 seconds west. The next one is called degree decimal minutes. So you would read that one, I'm at 45 degrees, 25.450 minutes north, etc. And the last one is called decimal degrees. So it's just the degrees. So you just say, I'm at 45.424167 degrees north, and then you give the 75, the latitude and the longitude, obviously. But it's important to give it very carefully and very slowly and succinctly so that the rescuers get it right, because it's not uncommon for us to get these things and it's been mixed up. So somebody will say, well, I'm at 45, 25, 27, and whoever's the 911 operator might think that is degree decimal minutes and not degrees, decimals, and minutes. So, and it makes a difference. It's not huge sometimes, but it can be like 700 meters, and that can be quite a bit of distance. We've searched for people again at Luskville Falls, where we had a location for them, but they were actually 700 meters away from that. So give your location carefully. One of the things I said too, in a situation, if you want to use your phone, it's an important item if you're going to be rescued. So keep your phone warm. Don't waste your battery. Don't play solitaire while you're waiting to be found, because it will use it up. So, and if you can charge your phone again, do so. But so just make that battery last as long as you possibly can.
Keeping warm is important. Having it in your outside pocket of your coat, it's going to go down really quickly. So yeah, inside your coat is super important in the winter time. So Jack started talking a bit about, people are going to come and help you. So we thought we would just finish off the talk with kind of talking a bit about ground search and rescue and how we go about doing what we do. So one of the key principles of ground search or search and rescue is that search is an emergency, because with time, just like Jack was saying, the search area increases. Also with time, the chance that a person might become injured because they're tripping over things, or that they might become hypothermic, increases also. And also with times, the clues that a person leaves behind might be either degraded or lost if it's raining or if it starts to snow. Like, it's great to be able to find tracks in the snow, but if it snows on top of it because we've waited all day to look for you, then can be a problem. So because search is an emergency, we need to get going real fast. And that's where the trip plan comes into play. So if you have a trip plan and a person knows you're supposed to come back at 4 and by 6 you're not there and you're worried and you call the police, we can get that search started really early. So the trip plan will allow you to allow somebody to contact the authorities earlier than later. Also with the trip plan, we know where to start the search. Sometimes people wonder, why are there people looking out for this lost person? But if you don't know where the actual incident started, the area that you need to search is so huge. So you need to have like what we call the initial planning point, is that point where we can start the search, a trailhead, a parking lot, those kinds of things from your home if you walked away from your home. And also knowing the activity that you're going to be doing, like when I was saying, why you're out there. And that helps us kind of unlock a really amazing tool called Lost Person Profiles. And Jack was going to talk a bit about that.
So it doesn't matter what group it is, whether it's, say, a toddler or a teenager or a hunter or a despondent person or somebody with Alzheimer's. Each of those groups does very different things when they get lost. In North America, over probably the last 30 years, thousands of cases of people being lost have been documented. And eventually that's allowed us to develop these profiles of what different people do. And it's compiled in a book called lost person behavior. So that is the Bible for us as search managers. So the first thing we do in a search is try to figure out what the profile of the person is. So in this case, and we've given you an example of a hiker. So this is one of the things that the lost person profile is going to tell us is how far do these people usually walk before they're found or go before they're found. It tells us usually what types of environments they're found in, what kind of things they do. So this is a map that this is how we would start a search for a hiker, for example. And this is the hiker profile. So this is, if you recognize that map, that's actually P19 there, just as you come into the park at Lac Philippe. And so the circles represent 25%. So 25% of hikers would be lost or would be found within that distance from where they went lost. In the next circle, that's 50% of hikers would be found in that area. And the outer ring is 75%. So we would use that to kind of give us an idea of what areas should we be focused on searching to start with. So that's the very start of our search.
So we start by figuring out the search area, and then we start defining how we're going to go about searching. And often the image that we have of searching is what we see in the movies. You know, little Johnny is lost, and you know the whole village lines up and then starts, you know, walking down and you know, a field or a forest. And this is not how we search. Actually, you know, this kind of what we call closed grid search is you know, is something we use as a last resort. It's extremely resource intensive, and it takes a horrendous amount of time to cover these areas that we're talking about. So this is not really how searches happen now. So there is a really interesting tool that was developed. So through the years, they realized in that very first, what we call it sort of an initial response to an incident, there's a series of task that could be undertaken that will provide you with some successful outcomes, and they're called reflex taskings. So, and they're based on this sort of bike wheel model. So you can imagine this bicycle wheel fitting over that map that we were talking about before, and then we're looking at assignments that affect all the various aspects of the bike wheel. So, for example, the axle. In this case, at P19, maybe the person left their car. So we're going to check inside the car. Are there any clues as to the person, their intention, the equipment they had? Are there any tracks around the car that can let us know they went north, south, east, west, which diminishes the circle depending if we know where they're coming from. So the axle will be a first assignment. The rim is the outer edge of that search area. And what we want to do there is want to make sure that the person, if they were to continue walking, doesn't go out of the search area. So it's called confinement or containment. We're trying to keep the person in the search area. So we can patrol trails, we can put roadblocks. So we're trying to keep the person within the wheel. The hub and gear, this area here, is at 25%, that circle of 25%. And that's kind of like the highest density in some ways, the highest chance of finding a person within that 25%. So we want to kind of make sure that that 25% is really, really searched thoroughly. So we would do sort of like grid search there, but in a kind of an open, kind of wide separation between people. And we would only use teams maximum 7. Beyond 7, you're beyond span of control. It's really hard to manage a group that's larger than that. The spokes are all the linear features within a search environment. So they could be a trail, they can be a road, they could be a power line, they could be a stream, they could be a shoreline. So they're like all kinds of various sort of methods that people can travel through the area. So we would search, we would do hasty search on those things, quickly go on all the trails, quickly go on all the roads, just to make sure that either the person isn't on them, or that we don't see any clues as to maybe they stepped off that particular trail and things like that, or there's sign of passage. And then the reflector on your bikes, those are called sort of the attractions for the person. So let's say, you know, like if you're hiking, maybe one the cabins, you know, the shelters in Gatineau Park would be an attraction. Lookout would be an attraction. If you're a mushroom picker, a mushroom patch would be an attraction. If you're gathering wild garlic, which you're not supposed to, but if you do happen to do that, the garlic patch will be attractors. So we would check those. And we also would check hazards, like if they're a quarry, abandoned mine, those kinds of things, we would check those also as being sort of a key, sort of a reflector. So this kind of is a way that in like 5-10 minutes when we arrive at a search, we can look at the map with the circles, we can apply this model, and we can have like 10 to 12 assignments. And as searchers come in, we can just sort of dispatch them and they can go in the field and do these assignments. So that's kind of how sort of modern search and rescue has evolved into this, using the lost person profiles and doing these reflex tasking at the very beginning of the search. And what's has is a really important impact on search times. So of the statistics that Jack was talking about, 25% of searchers are concluded an hour, you know, 50 in 3 hours, up to 81% is 12 hours, 93% is 24 hours. So really, you know, we're having success, you know, within that time frame where the person, you know, hopefully is not injured or, you know, has managed to stay conscious, can respond to us, all those kinds of things. So it's really quite interesting, that whole field of search and rescue, how it's evolved over the last, you know, 30 to 40 years. So basically, in some ways, what we were talking about at the beginning, we're hoping that we gave you some tips to sort of be able to enjoy the outdoors in a safe manner, so that like hopefully nothing will happen to you because you're well prepared, you've got what you need. And then if something does happen, then you're also prepared to deal with that, so that it's, you know, it's not going to be comfortable, but it's going to be, you know, safer than if you have no equipment, no training, etc., and people don't know you're lost. And then what we're saying is that all of that will actually help us find you in good shape. So that's kind of what we would be looking for.